All right, let's dive in. We've got a lot to cover today, from the long-term impacts of Brexit to a mountain with actual legal rights.
It's amazing to see how these seemingly unrelated things are all kind of tied together.
We've even got the weight loss drug craze, possible sabotage in the Baltic Sea, a plane crash, Target facing a boycott.
And some truly groundbreaking AI developments. Plus, Super Bowl ads and healthy cooking tips, just to keep things balanced.
Let's start with Brexit. It's been 5 years since the UK officially left the EU, and this AP article we have shows just how complex things still are.
Yeah, one thing that really stands out is how the whole idea of Brexit, regaining sovereignty, is running headfirst into those long-term economic forecasts.
And by running headfirst, we're talking about a potential 10% hit to the GDP over the next decade. Right.
That's a major prediction, and it mostly comes down to barriers to trade and reduced investment. It really makes you think, how could that impact things like personal finances or the cost of everyday goods?
Makes you think. All right. The article also highlights some interesting stories of business owners after Brexit, like Lars Anderson, who runs My Name Tags.
Right, you had to set up a whole new base in Ireland just to keep trading with the EU.
Talk about logistical headaches. Then there's Julianne Ponan from Creative Nature, who found new markets after losing a huge chunk of their European business.
But even then, it's taken them 4 years to start making up for that lost growth.
That's a long time to be playing catch-up. I wonder, even for those of us not directly involved in international trade, has Brexit had some sort of indirect effect?
Well, think about supply chain disruptions, changes in travel, maybe even just a shift in global perspective.
Hmm.
We live in a globalized world. These shifts tend to reach pretty far.
Okay, speaking of shifting perspectives, let's talk about this mountain with legal rights.
Mount Taranaki in New Zealand.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. Tell me everything.
This mountain is incredibly significant to the Maori people. They see it as an ancestor, a source of sustenance.
Beautiful concept. But how does a mountain get legal personhood?
It's a growing movement, recognizing the rights of nature. In this case, the New Zealand government actually created a legal entity called Takawi Tupua.
What is that?
It's designed to represent the mountain's interests, and it's made up of both Maori representatives and government appointees.
So both sides are represented.
Right, and this whole thing challenges how we think about rights, about who or what needs protection.
It really does. What other natural entities might deserve this kind of recognition? Rivers, forests, the ocean itself?
Worth thinking about.
Yeah.
Now, for something totally different, weight loss drugs.
Oh, yeah. Ozempic and Wegovy, they're everywhere. But this AP-NORC poll shows just how divided people are, especially about teenagers using them.
The poll found that about half of Americans approve of adults with obesity using them. But for teenagers, that support just plummets.
So there's a real ethical dilemma here. Should these drugs be readily available for weight loss, even if someone's not diagnosed with obesity?
Yeah, and you have to consider all the societal pressure around body image.
Right. The poll also mentions Anjanette Ewan, who says she lost 67 pounds on Manjaro, and that actually helped her find a cancerous lump.
That's incredible, but it does raise those questions about side effects, about the long-term impact of these medications. And keep in mind, these GLP-1 drugs, they were originally for diabetes.
Right.
Now they're being prescribed more and more for weight loss, especially as childhood obesity rates continue to climb.
It shows how urgent it is to tackle the obesity epidemic, but it also makes you wonder if we're relying too much on medication instead of addressing things like access to healthy food and education about nutrition.
That's the key. All right, shifting gears completely now, we've got these damaged Baltic Sea cables. It's a pretty concerning situation.
Damaged cables, what's the big deal?
Well, we've got a French Navy plane actively patrolling the Baltic Sea, watching ships really closely for anything suspicious. And these aren't just any cables. They carry power, communication, even gas, connecting countries across the Baltic region.
Sounds pretty high stakes.
Absolutely. It shows just how vulnerable our world is to disruptions. And there's conflicting opinions about what happened.
Likewise.
Some intelligence officials think the damage was accidental, maybe from a ship's anchor, while others are pointing the finger at Russia, a kind of hybrid warfare tactic.
So we don't really know for sure.
Exactly. And that ambiguity just adds another layer of complexity. In a world so interconnected, how do we protect those vital systems when it's not always clear if something's an accident or deliberate attack?
Good question. Sadly, we have a somber topic now, that tragic plane crash in D.C. 67 people dead.
Heartbreaking.
The deadliest aviation disaster in the U.S. for almost 25 years. A mid-air collision, an American Airlines jet, and an Army helicopter. It happened as the plane was landing at Reagan National. They're still recovering bodies from the Potomac. What do we know about the investigation?
They're looking into several things: airspace restrictions, helicopter flight paths, and of course the air traffic controller's actions.
The article mentioned something chilling. There was only one air traffic controller handling both helicopters and planes at the time.
Wow.
Makes you think about the workload, the staffing levels. How can we be sure those systems we rely on for air travel safety are really up to the task?
It's a huge question.
Mm.
And unfortunately, this tragedy forces us to face that question head on. How can seemingly small oversights have such catastrophic consequences?
Let's move on to another kind of conflict now, the Target boycott.
Right, Target's facing a lot of heat for phasing out their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, their DEI
This
programs.
is all happening in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered, which sparked that national movement for racial justice.
It's symbolic, for sure. And this really reflects a bigger pushback against DEI initiatives all over. It taps into that deep social and political divide we're seeing.
So where's the line between corporate responsibility and just bowing to market pressures?
It's a question everyone has to grapple with. And now into the world of AI. Things are getting shaken up by this Chinese company, DeepSeek.
What have they done?
They've developed a chatbot that's not just advanced, it's super cost effective. They say they trained their R1 model for just $5.6 million.
That's nothing compared to the billions spent by the big guys like OpenAI and Microsoft.
It's a total game changer. It challenges the idea that only those big companies can play in the AI field. This could lead to a much wider access to AI technology.
That's exciting. But what about the environmental impact? All those data centers use a ton of energy.
That's a crucial point. If DeepSeek's claims about their efficient model are true, it could mean a big reduction in energy consumption for AI. Imagine if we could do those routine AI tasks right on our smartphones. No need for those massive data centers.
That would be a win for the climate. But the big question, did DeepSeek copy OpenAI's ChatGPT?
There's some evidence that their AI assistant sometimes identifies as ChatGPT, even refers to OpenAI's policies.
So is it copying or not?
It's not that straightforward. Some people see it as clear plagiarism, but others point to AI distillation, which is pretty common.
AI distillation, what's that?
Basically, a new AI model learns from an existing one. It kind of absorbs its knowledge. Think of it like a student learning from a master.
So it's a bit blurry.
It does. In AI, where things move so fast, where innovation and imitation are so close, how do we define those ethical boundaries? How do we make sure competition is fair? Imagine if someone could train an AI on your writing style, your creative work, without your permission. Would that be a problem?
I'd say so. It's like the rules of intellectual property are being rewritten right before our eyes.
Exactly. All right, let's take a break from the serious stuff and talk about Super Bowl ads.
Yes. Super Bowl's almost here, which means ridiculously expensive commercials.
This year, the prices are record-breaking, over $8 million for a 30-second spot. That shows you the power of reaching that massive Super Bowl audience.
What trends are we seeing this year?
Fewer car companies are advertising, probably cutting back after a tough year. But given our earlier conversation, I bet AI will show up in some ads. And of course, you can always count on drinks and snacks.
Any particularly memorable ones so far?
Budweiser has one with a Clydesdale Full delivering beer. Classic. And then Michelob Ultra has one with Willem Dafoe and Catherine O'Hara playing pickleball. Pretty funny.
I love Super Bowl ads. Are they just entertainment, or do they say something deeper about us, about our culture?
I think it's both. They're often those cultural moments that spark discussion, even controversy. They're definitely more than just ads.
All right, back to reality now. Let's talk about healthy ways to cook vegetables.
Right, back to the basics. We have this article by Carlene Thomas, a registered dietitian, and she says the best way to cook veggies is the way you'll actually eat them.
Makes sense. What's the point of steaming if you just end up throwing away those soggy broccoli florets?
Exactly. It's all about making those veggies taste good. There's science behind it, too. Cooking can actually make it easier for your body to absorb those nutrients. Steaming and microwaving are generally best for preserving them.
Good to know. But what if I'm just not a fan of steamed veggies?
Here's a tip. A little oil not only adds flavor, it actually helps you absorb those fat-soluble vitamins. So, that olive oil on your roasted carrots is a good thing.
I like the sound of that.
This article even have a couple of tempting recipes. Amber Pankonen's sautéed green beans with lemon, garlic, and shallots, and Carlene Thomas's twice-baked Carissa sweet potatoes.
Sounds delicious. I'm definitely adding those to my meal plan.
Finding new ways to enjoy veggies is always a good thing.
Agreed. I think that's a great place to wrap up part one of our deep dive. We'll be back soon to explore more of these fascinating topics and uncover those surprising connections.
Stay tuned. That was a lot to take in, wasn't it? All these different things happening. It's amazing how it all comes together, though. Speaking of unexpected events, did you see that story about the truck driver in Japan?
I don't think so. What happened?
This massive sinkhole, they think it was caused by some old sewage pipes, opened up in a road north of Tokyo,
Oh no.
and it swallowed a whole truck, with the driver still inside.
That's terrifying.
They've been trying to rescue him, but it's really complicated. The ground is so unstable, they managed to lift the truck's platform out with cranes. But the cabin, where the driver was trapped, is still down there.
So he's still stuck.
Yeah, they're trying to build a ramp to reach him, but it's a really delicate operation. Could take days. Meanwhile, they had to evacuate people living nearby, and they asked like 1 million people in the area to cut back on their water use.
Wow, 1 million people just because of one sinkhole.
Yeah, they don't want the water overflowing into it. It really shows how vulnerable our infrastructure is, how interconnected everything is, even just in a city. Makes you think. This whole thing actually reminds me of that controversy with DeepSeek, that Chinese AI company we talked about, the one accused of copying ChatGPT.
Right. What's happening with that? Did they sort it out?
Not really. It's actually become a bit of an international issue now. Italy's Data Protection Authority has blocked access to DeepSeek's app. Yeah, they want to protect user data, and they're even launching an investigation into the company. So it's not just about intellectual property anymore. There are worries about data privacy and security, too.
What's DeepSeek saying about all this?
It's complicated. They're saying that those European data regulations don't even apply to them because they don't operate in Italy.
So it's a jurisdictional thing.
Yeah, a bit of a tug-of-war.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. It could really set a precedent for how we deal with these AI companies, how we protect user data in this global digital world. It makes you wonder, with all this talk about responsible AI, what's going on with the new health secretary here in the U.S.?
Oh, right. That's been in the news a lot. President Trump's pick for health secretary has been causing quite a stir.
Especially after those confirmation hearings.
It didn't go so well.
Not exactly. He spent 2 days trying to convince senators that he's not anti-vaccine. But his past statements, they've raised some serious red flags.
Yeah, his stance on vaccine safety has always been controversial. Seems like a tough position to hold as the head of the health department.
Several senators, including Dr. Bill Cassidy, he's a Republican from Louisiana, directly challenged him on his views, presented scientific evidence that vaccines are safe and not linked to autism.
What did he say to that?
He claimed he'd recommend vaccines if shown the data, even said he'd apologize for any statements that misled people. But then he avoided questions about his previous claims that the HPV vaccine can cause cancer.
That seems a bit contradictory, especially if he's going to be overseeing vaccine research and recommendations as health secretary.
It gets even more controversial. Senator Angela Alsobrooks, she's a Democrat from Maryland, brought up his past comments about Black people maybe needing a different vaccination schedule than white people.
Oh, wow.
He tried to backtrack, mentioning some old studies about immune responses and ancestry. But medical experts have said that vaccination schedules aren't based on race. It's about biological factors, age, individual risk.
So his hearings have gotten a lot of pushback from both medical professionals and lawmakers. What happens if he actually gets confirmed?
People are worried. They say his unfounded claims could damage public trust in vaccines, lead to more outbreaks of preventable diseases. It's a real concern for public health. It's interesting, we're talking about health, about different views on things, and it reminds me of all these ADHD diagnoses lately.
I know, right? It feels like everyone I know is either getting diagnosed or wondering if they have it.
There was this article about the possible reasons for this increase. Some people think it's just more awareness, better diagnostic tools, while others suggest it's our lifestyle, more screen time, faster pace of life.
It's hard to say for sure. I read about this woman, Allison Burke. Her teenage daughter was diagnosed with ADHD, and it made her realize that she'd been living with it for years without knowing.
That happens a lot. People start seeing the signs in themselves after seeing it in their kids or learning more about it.
So how many people are out there undiagnosed, untreated? But then, are we also overdiagnosing it?
That's a valid concern. It's really important to have a proper evaluation by a mental health professional, not just rely on online quizzes or whatever.
So if someone thinks they might have ADHD, what should they do?
They should talk to their doctor, get a referral to a specialist. It usually involves interviews, cognitive tests to check memory and concentration, and making sure it's not something else, like anxiety or depression.
Sounds complicated.
It can be. And finding the right mental health professional can be tough too. Long wait lists, high costs. It's a real barrier for a lot of people.
Hmm.
Speaking of challenges in our modern world, let's talk about screen fatigue.
Ugh, tell me about it. I feel like I'm constantly staring at a screen.
There's this article with some helpful tips for dealing with it. The biggest thing is taking breaks.
Yeah, no, easier said than done.
I know, right? But it's so important. Even just looking away for a few minutes can make a difference. It can help prevent eye strain, headaches, even blurry vision.
What else can we do besides taking breaks?
You can try lubricating eye drops for dryness. Adjust your screen brightness, how far away you are. Some people even use blue light glasses, although the evidence for those is still mixed.
It's good to have options. We're all so reliant on these devices now, it's important to find ways to manage it.
It's all about balance. Minimizing the bad effects without disconnecting completely. Speaking of staying connected, have you seen what President Trump's been saying about the D.C. plane crash?
Yeah, those comments about DEI maybe being a factor in the crash seems a bit controversial while the investigation is still going on.
He's getting a lot of criticism for that. People are saying it's insensitive, potentially harmful, even that he's trying to use this tragedy to score political points.
It's definitely adding fuel to that whole debate about DEI initiatives. Did he say anything else about the crash?
He also used it as an opportunity to push for faster confirmation of his cabinet nominees, saying it's crucial to have those key positions filled, especially during a crisis. But he did try to reassure people that flying is still safe.
It'll be interesting to see how people react to all this. Could really escalate things, especially in the political landscape.
It just shows how politics always seems to find its way into these events, shaping how we perceive things. This conversation about the past, about how things connect, it makes me think of that article about ancient lead pollution in Greece.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Thousands of years ago, and they were already dealing with pollution.
It shows how long humans have been impacting the environment.
The study found lead contamination going back to the 4th century BC, way before the Roman Empire.
They think it was from silver mining and smelting. It makes you wonder what traces our modern industries will leave behind, what future archaeologists will find.
It does, doesn't it? Speaking of the past and present, what about Brexit? There was that piece about the unintended consequence.
Oh, yeah, the irony. One of the main reasons people voted for Brexit was to reduce immigration.
Right, but now immigration to the UK is actually higher than before Brexit. How is that even possible? I thought the whole point was to limit it.
Well, they did restrict movement from EU countries, but they've increased the number of visas for workers from other parts of the world.
So they're just replacing one type of immigration with another.
Basically, and it's causing a lot of debate. People who voted for Brexit based on immigration, are they happy with this outcome? It really shows how complex these policies are, how even the most straightforward actions can have unexpected results.
It makes you think about those protectionist policies, about how we manage global migration in a world that's constantly changing. And now, with Trump back in the picture and his protectionist stance, it's going to be even more interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely. The UK is in a tricky spot. They're trying to balance their ties with Europe and their relationship with the US, which is becoming more and more protectionist under Trump.
It's like walking a tightrope. What do you think will happen?
Hard to say. The UK is forging its own path, and the old rules of global trade and diplomacy are being rewritten. How this all plays out, it could have a big impact on their economy, their place in the world.
It's fascinating to watch it all unfold. It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
Absolutely. What happens in one part of the world can ripple out and affect everyone. We're more connected than ever. And as we've seen today, politics, economics, technology, even our own health and well-being, it's all intertwined.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is, but that's what makes these deep dives so interesting, so valuable. It helps us connect the dots, understand this world that's constantly in flux. Thinking about connections, I was reminded of that piece about the Roman army conquering Greece in 146 BC.
Right. Fascinating bit of history.
And it actually ties into that lead pollution study we talked about earlier.
How so?
The article explained how the Roman conquest changed Greek society, leading to more trade, more demand for silver coins.
And that led to more silver mining, more smelting, which probably contributed to all that lead pollution during Roman times.
Exactly. It shows that even those ancient empires had a big environmental impact. Makes you think, what will our legacy be? What will future generations find when they dig up our cities, our industries?
Thought-provoking, for sure. Hopefully we can learn from the past, find better, more sustainable ways to do things. I think we've covered pretty much everything from our sources for this part of our deep dive.
It's been quite a ride. Brexit, sinkholes, weight loss drugs, AI, all these different threads weaving together.
And those Super Bowl ads, can't forget those.
It's amazing how even something as simple as a commercial can tell us so much about ourselves, about our hopes and fears.
It's all connected in the end.
It really is. So as we wrap up this part, I want to encourage everyone to think about those connections you've made between these seemingly random topics. What have you learned? What questions are you left with?
Lots to think about, that's for sure. That's what I love about these deep dives. They spark our curiosity, challenge us, and leave us wanting more.
Exactly. The more we learn, the more we realize how much more there is to discover. We'll be back soon for the final part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. It's really incredible how all these different stories or research articles can come together to show us what's happening in the world.
It really does. It's like a tapestry of events and ideas. Speaking of which, remember that story about the sinkhole in Japan, the one that swallowed the truck? There's been an update.
Oh, I hope they were able to rescue the driver.
Unfortunately not. They tried everything they could, but they couldn't save him.
That's so sad. It's a harsh reminder that even with all our technology, we're still vulnerable to the forces of nature.
Yeah, it really is. And this brings to mind another concerning development. There's growing worry about the mental health of air traffic controllers, especially after that terrible plane crash in D.C.
I can imagine. Witnessing something like that, it would have a profound impact on anyone, especially the people responsible for guiding those planes.
Right. We have an article here that talks about the intense pressure they're under, the scrutiny, especially after a major incident like this. The FAA has always acknowledged that it's a demanding job, a high-stress job.
It's a critical role with very little margin for error. So what kind of support do they have? What's being done to help them cope?
There are systems in place, but some experts say it's not enough. They're calling for more to be done to address the psychological strain, to really ensure their well-being. This crash has brought the whole issue back into the spotlight.
It's a conversation that needs to happen, especially with air travel becoming more and more complex.
Absolutely. The demands on air traffic controllers are only going to increase. It reminds us that even in these highly technical fields, the human factor is crucial.
It is. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive for today. We've explored so much from Brexit and those weight loss drugs to AI, the plane crash, so many different things.
A real journey through current events and ideas. Hopefully you found it informative, maybe even eye-opening.
I know I have. It just reinforces the importance of staying informed, of questioning our assumptions, and considering different viewpoints.
Absolutely. The more we learn, the more we realize how much there is to explore. And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? This constant process of discovery.
It is. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more fascinating topics and thought-provoking discussions.
Until next time.